welcome to the channel. Today we've got something incredible for you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a secret that only the forest knew. In the heart of the quiet village, a young woman disappeared without a trace, leaving behind nothing but a cryptic message in her journal. The watcher knows the truth. But what was the truth? And who or what was the watcher? As the moon rose high above, the forest stirred, ready to reveal its deepest secret, if only someone was brave enough to uncover it. Will you be the one to discover what lies hidden in the shadows? Stay with me. The mystery is just beginning. Chapter 1. The Disappearance. The sun had just begun to dip beneath the horizon, casting a warm amber glow across the tranquil village of Willowsend. Nestled at the edge of the dense forest of Tynwald, the village had always been a haven of serenity, where the hustle of the outside world felt a distant memory. The villagers lived in harmony with the forest, tending to their gardens, caring for their families, and relying on the slow, steady rhythm of life that had remained unchanged for generations. However, a sense of unease had begun to take root in the village, an unspoken tension that seemed to hang in the air like the first chill of autumn. At the heart of it was the sudden disappearance of Mary Littlewood, the daughter of the village's respected botanist. Her absence had shaken the village to its core, for Mary was known to be a curious and bright young woman, always exploring the woods, fascinated by the flora and fauna that surrounded Willowsend. But this time, she had ventured into the forest and had not returned. Her parents, Andrew and Eleanor Littlewood, were beside themselves with worry. Mary had always been a creature of habit, someone who could never go a day without tending to her plants or taking long walks in the forest. Yet there had been no word from her since the previous evening, and as the hours stretched into the early morning, their anxiety grew into full-blown panic. Desperation led them to reach out to a trusted friend, Lord Dunmore, a gentleman with connections to the wider world, who immediately sent for help. It was then that Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective, and his loyal companion, Dr. John Watson, were called to the scene. Arriving in Willowsend on the first morning train, Holmes and Watson were greeted by Lord Dunmore, a man who appeared both agitated and relieved to have the detectives on the case. He explained the gravity of the situation, describing Mary as a well-behaved and independent young woman who had no reason to wander off unannounced. "There is one thing," Lord Dunmore said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Before her disappearance, Mary spoke of seeing someone in the forest. She mentioned a figure, tall, dark and shadowy, but we thought little of it at the time. Holmes listened intently, his sharp mind already beginning to piece together the puzzle. "I assume you've searched the forest thoroughly?" he asked, his eyes glinting with curiosity. Lord Dunmore nodded. "The villagers have combed every inch of the woods, but we found no sign of her. Nothing. It's as if she vanished into thin air." Holmes stood silently for a moment, his gaze turned toward the distant trees. The forest of Tynwald was a place of deep mystery, a tangled web of ancient trees and winding paths that had witnessed countless generations come and go. Some whispered that the forest held secrets, that the very ground was alive with stories long forgotten. As Holmes and Watson walked toward the Littlewood estate, the detective's mind was already racing. He took note of the subtle details, the way the villagers looked away when they spoke of the forest, the unease that seemed to ripple beneath the surface of the otherwise calm atmosphere. He sensed something more than just a missing person. There was a hidden thread, a darkness that lay just beneath the peaceful exterior of Willowsend. The estate itself was an elegant, ivy-clad manor that overlooked the village and the forest beyond. The garden was meticulously kept, but even in its beauty there was a sense of stillness, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The Littlewoods' home was quiet, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. Inside, Mrs. Littlewood greeted them, her face pale and drawn with worry. She led them to the sitting room, where her husband Andrew was pacing nervously. "Have you found any clue as to where Mary might have gone?" Holmes asked, settling into a chair, his piercing eyes scanning the room. "We've found nothing," Andrew Littlewood said, his voice cracking with emotion. "But she must be out there somewhere. I know she wouldn't just leave without telling us. She's been acting strangely these past few days, distant, almost as if she knew something we didn't." Holmes raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more to this than met the eye. "Tell me about her last day," he said gently, his tone soothing but insistent. Mrs. Littlewood wiped a tear from her eye. "Mary went into the forest to collect some rare herbs she had been studying. She said she'd be back before dusk, but she didn't return." "Did she say anything unusual before she left?" Holmes inquired. "She seemed distracted," Mrs. Littlewood replied. "She mentioned hearing something in the woods, something that wasn't quite right, but I thought it was just her imagination." Holmes stood up, his fingers tapping gently against the arm of his chair. "Imagination, you say?" He turned to Watson, his voice steady and calm. "It seems that our search will begin with the forest, Watson. There is something in those woods, something that Mary found before she disappeared, and I believe it is not simply a figment of her imagination." As Holmes prepared to head towards the forest with Watson in tow, the evening fog began to roll in, obscuring the path ahead. The trees stood tall and imposing, their branches whispering secrets to one another. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, as if the forest itself was waiting for them. "Come, Watson," Holmes said, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Let us see what the woods have to offer." And with that, they set off into the forest, each step taking them closer to the mystery that lay hidden within its darkened depths, where the line between reality and the unknown was becoming ever more blurred. Chapter 2. The Clue in the Garden. The morning mist lingered in the village of Willowsend, soft and ethereal, as though nature herself was cloaking the land in a veil of secrecy. The pale sunlight barely managed to break through the dense fog, casting an almost dreamlike glow over the Littlewood estate. As Holmes and Watson arrived, the air felt heavy with the unspoken tension of the previous night's events. Mrs. Littlewood had been in a state of quiet despair since her daughter's disappearance. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, and she moved about the house as though in a trance, too worn to speak and too grief-stricken to act. Holmes, with his sharp observational skills, noticed all the small details: the faint tremor in her hands as she set down a cup of tea, the faraway look in her eyes as she stared at the door, as if waiting for Mary to walk through it at any moment. It was in these quiet moments of observation that Holmes was most at home. He knew that truth often lay hidden beneath layers of mundane distractions, waiting for someone to uncover it. "Watson," he murmured, "there is something here that doesn't sit right. We should examine the garden next." The garden was large, sprawling over the back of the estate with flower beds full of vibrant blooms and carefully tended hedges. It appeared peaceful, almost idyllic. But Holmes was not deceived. He walked slowly across the garden, his eyes scanning the grounds with a practiced precision. Watson followed, but the doctor could not help but feel the weight of the morning's quiet dread. Holmes stopped abruptly near the flower bed closest to the estate's stone wall. His eyes narrowed as he examined a patch of soil. There, amidst the flowers, was something amiss, a small area where the earth had been disturbed. He knelt down, brushing away a few petals, and there it was, a set of footprints. Curious, Holmes muttered under his breath, almost to himself. These are not the marks of a typical visitor. Watson leaned over to peer at the ground. The footprints were shallow, as if someone had been walking carefully, deliberately. They were not the deep, hurried prints one might expect from someone in distress, but instead, they were neat and composed, almost as if the person knew exactly where they were stepping. "Do you think these are Mary's?" Watson asked. Holmes shook his head. "No, these footprints are far too measured, too deliberate to be hers. The question is, who do they belong to?" He stood up, brushing the dirt from his knees, and began pacing back and forth across the garden, his mind working through the possibilities. There had been no signs of forced entry at the house. Mary had not left any clues behind in the house itself. But here, in the garden, something was different. He turned to Mrs. Littlewood, who had been standing silently at the doorway watching them. Her eyes followed his every movement, though her expression remained unreadable. "Mrs. Littlewood," Holmes began gently, "has anything unusual happened here recently? Any disturbances? Any strangers passing through the estate?" She hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering nervously toward the house. "Not that I know of, but—" Her voice trailed off as though she was hesitant to speak the words aloud. "There was something strange just before Mary left. She said she felt watched, like someone was following her, but she couldn't see who." Holmes's interest piqued. "Did she mention anything more? Anything specific about this feeling?" "Only that it was more than just a feeling," Mrs. Littlewood replied softly, her voice trembling. "She said she saw someone in the trees, just outside the edge of the garden. A tall figure just standing there, watching her. She was frightened, but she didn't tell me much more than that. I thought it was just her imagination running wild." Holmes's gaze darkened. There it was, a clue, hidden beneath layers of fear and uncertainty. "It seems, Watson, that the forest is not merely a backdrop to this mystery. It is at the very heart of it." As they continued to investigate, Holmes's keen eye caught something else, a slight indentation in the soil, barely noticeable if one were not looking closely. He bent down, carefully brushing the dirt aside to reveal something that had been hidden under the earth. A small, delicate object, half buried in the ground. Holmes picked it up gently, his fingers brushing against the cold surface. "A button," he said, inspecting it closely. It was a small, round thing, made of fine, polished wood, with intricate designs carved into its surface. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, though it seemed out of place in the otherwise natural setting of the garden. "Do you think this could belong to the person who was following Mary?" Watson asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Holmes didn't answer immediately. He turned the button over in his hand, feeling the weight of it, examining the patterns carved into its surface. His mind worked swiftly, drawing connections, seeking patterns. "I believe this may be an important clue, Watson," he said at last, his voice calm but resolute. "This button likely belonged to the figure that Mary saw, and I suspect it will lead us closer to understanding what happened to her." The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the leaves on the trees and carrying with it a faint sound, almost like a whisper. Holmes stood for a moment, listening. The faintest hint of a footstep echoed through the quiet garden, barely audible above the sound of the wind. "Someone is watching us," Holmes said, almost to himself. His eyes scanned the surrounding garden, searching for any sign of movement, any shadow that might betray the presence of the watcher. But there was nothing. Only the trees, the flowers, and the distant, quiet whisper of the forest. With a final glance at the disturbed earth and the button in his hand, Holmes turned back to Mrs. Littlewood. "Mrs. Littlewood, I believe we must now turn our attention to the forest. The answers you seek are hidden within its depths. As they made their way toward the edge of the garden, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, as though the very air around them was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And Holmes, his mind alive with new theories and suspicions, knew that the true mystery of Mary Littlewood's disappearance lay hidden within the forest, waiting to be uncovered, if they could only find the courage to uncover it. Chapter 3. A Hidden Passage. The morning after their investigation of the garden, Holmes and Watson set out into the forest of Tynwald, the very place where Mary Littlewood had been seen last. The fog still clung to the trees like a shroud, weaving its way through the gnarled branches of ancient oaks, and the forest floor was thick with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. It was a place both serene and unsettling, with shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they ought to, and whispers that barely kissed the ear. As they walked deeper into the forest, Holmes's pace was measured, his eyes constantly darting from one shadow to another, analyzing every detail. Watson, though accustomed to Holmes's intense scrutiny, felt a slight unease, the weight of the silence pressing in on them. The trees loomed tall above, their twisted roots clawing at the ground, creating an intricate maze of paths, most of which were well worn but led nowhere in particular. Holmes paused, his sharp gaze locking onto a faint trail in the underbrush. "Do you see this, Watson?" he asked, crouching down to inspect the faint footprints. They were not deep impressions, but they were distinct, barely visible, as though someone had been walking quietly, deliberately avoiding leaving too many marks behind. "These are fresh," Holmes muttered, "and they lead deeper into the woods." His eyes glinted with determination. "We must follow them." As they pressed on, the deeper they ventured, the more the atmosphere seemed to change. The trees grew thicker, their branches entwining like outstretched hands, blocking out the sunlight entirely. The path became less clear, more tangled. Watson could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end as he realized how easy it would be to lose oneself in this vast, shadowed place. After what seemed like an eternity of walking in near silence, Holmes suddenly stopped. He stood motionless, his eyes fixed on a patch of ivy that hung heavily against a large, moss-covered stone wall. Watson stepped closer, following Holmes's gaze, and then he saw it, a faint indentation at the base of the stone, as if something had been pushed into the wall. Without a word, Holmes moved forward, his fingers brushing against the ivy. With a soft, almost imperceptible click, the wall shifted, revealing a hidden doorway. Watson's breath caught in his throat. "What in the world?" he whispered. Holmes stepped forward, his face a picture of calm certainty. "It seems we have found something more than a mere trail of footprints," he said quietly. "A hidden passage. I suspect this will lead us closer to the heart of this mystery." The door was narrow and barely wide enough for them to pass through side by side, but it opened into a dark passage that seemed to stretch endlessly into the depths of the forest. Holmes stepped forward without hesitation, and Watson followed, though unease rippled through him. The walls of the passage were damp and rough to the touch, their surface slick with moss and the remnants of moisture that seemed to seep from the earth itself. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the passage, and the silence that surrounded them was deafening. The only sound was the soft echo of their footsteps, muffled by the thick layers of ancient stone and earth. The farther they walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The forest outside had seemed calm and quiet, but in here, in this hidden tunnel beneath the trees, there was something suffocating about the stillness. "Holmes," Watson said, his voice low and cautious, "do you think this tunnel could be connected to the monks who once lived here?" Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning the dark ahead of them. It is highly probable. The records I found mentioned a secretive order of monks who once called this forest home. Their disappearance is one of the oldest and most whispered about mysteries in the region. What if they built this passage to hide something, or to protect something? Watson felt the weight of Holmes's words settle around them, thick and heavy. What could possibly be hidden here, beneath the roots of these ancient trees that had remained untouched for centuries? The passage finally began to widen, the walls curving gently outward, until they came to a small circular room. The air in the chamber was thick with age, the scent of dust and forgotten time hanging heavy. In the centre of the room stood a stone pedestal, and on it lay something covered in a dark, tattered cloth. Holmes approached the pedestal with the same calm precision that marked his every move. He lifted the cloth carefully, revealing an old wooden box, its surface intricately carved with symbols Watson didn't recognize. The carvings were worn with age, but they still held an eerie beauty, a glimpse into a past long forgotten. "This," Holmes whispered, "is what they were hiding." As Holmes gently lifted the box from its resting place, Watson could feel a shift in the air, a subtle, almost imperceptible change, like the stillness of the forest had found its way into this hidden space. It was as if the very room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Holmes examined the box carefully, his fingers tracing the intricate designs carved into its surface. The more he looked, the more his expression grew solemn. "This box," Holmes said, almost to himself, "has been here for a very long time. And I suspect that whatever is inside it is connected to Mary's disappearance." He paused, his brow furrowing as he considered the possibilities. The figure she saw, the one watching her in the garden. Perhaps it is tied to this ancient mystery. Suddenly there was a sound, a faint rustling, almost like a whisper, that seemed to come from deep within the tunnel behind them. Watson turned, startled, but there was nothing. The air remained still, the silence suffocating. Yet the sense that they were not alone, that someone or something was watching them, lingered like a shadow in the corners of the room. "Holmes, do you hear that?" Watson asked, his voice tinged with unease. Holmes's face was unreadable, but his sharp eyes were alert, scanning the tunnel once more. "I hear nothing, Watson. But you are right to be cautious. We are not alone down here." With the box in hand, Holmes motioned for Watson to follow him. "Let's return to the surface," he said quietly. "There is more to this than we can yet understand. But we are getting closer." As they made their way back through the tunnel, the feeling of being watched intensified. Every step seemed to echo in the silence, every rustle of the leaves above them now a whisper from the past. The forest outside seemed to hold its breath as they emerged, stepping once again into the daylight. Holmes's face was grim, but his resolve had never been clearer. "We are on the edge of something, Watson. Whatever is hidden in these woods, whatever force is behind this mystery, it is all connected to the past. And I believe we have just uncovered the first piece of the puzzle." And as the two of them made their way back toward the village, the forest seemed to close in behind them, its secrets once again veiled in shadow, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Chapter 4. The Watcher's Secret. The forest was eerily still as Holmes and Watson returned from the hidden passage. Though the sun had risen high, the thick canopy of trees above filtered the light, casting long, languid shadows over the forest floor. The air was dense with the scent of damp earth, mingled with the sharp tang of pine and moss. Each step Holmes took seemed deliberate, his mind already racing through the newly discovered clues. Watson followed closely behind, but a creeping unease stirred in him, the hairs on the back of his neck tingling as though something, or someone, was watching them. The stone box Holmes had found in the hidden room remained in his grasp, the weight of it a constant reminder that they were on the brink of something much larger than a mere missing person. What secret did this box hold? And more importantly, how was it connected to Mary Littlewood's disappearance? Holmes had remained unusually silent since their exit from the hidden passage, his mind clearly working over the possible implications of what they had discovered. It was clear that something far older than the village of Willowsend itself lay hidden in these woods, and Mary had inadvertently stumbled upon it. "I can feel it, Watson," Holmes muttered under his breath. "This forest, it has secrets, deep, ancient secrets, and I believe they are tied to the very core of this mystery." Watson, though accustomed to Holmes's enigmatic musings, couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had taken root in him. The air seemed heavier now, as if the trees themselves were bearing down on them, each step deeper into the forest, bringing them closer to an unknown truth that lay hidden beneath centuries of silence. As they walked, Holmes's gaze shifted toward a distant clearing, where the trees seemed to part just enough to allow a sliver of light to pour through. The clearing was small, a natural hollow in the forest, but there was something off about it, something unsettling, as if the very earth itself had been disturbed. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low but steady, "we are about to discover something crucial. Stay close." They approached the clearing cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves and underbrush. The sunlight filtering through the branches above cast the entire space in a soft golden hue, but there was a coldness to it, a strange, unnatural stillness that hung in the air, making every breath feel weighted. Holmes's eyes darted around the clearing, his sharp gaze scanning every inch of the landscape, looking for signs of something hidden. And then, just as Watson was about to ask what they were looking for, Holmes's hand shot out, stopping Watson in his tracks. "There," Holmes whispered. In the middle of the clearing stood an old stone monument, half hidden beneath a thick layer of ivy and moss. It was not particularly large, just a simple pillar, but its significance was undeniable. Holmes moved toward it, his expression unreadable, and began to examine the base of the monument. He cleared away the moss, revealing a set of carvings etched into the stone. The markings were strange, not like anything Holmes had seen before. There was a pattern to them, a series of concentric circles, almost like a seal. Watson stepped forward, his curiosity piqued. "What do you make of it, Holmes?" Holmes ran his fingers over the carvings, his brow furrowed in concentration. "These symbols," he murmured, "are not of any known civilization. They are older, much older. It's as if this monument was built to mark something important." He paused, his voice lowering to almost a whisper. "I suspect this is where the Watcher has been guarding his secret." "Watcher?" Watson repeated, feeling a shiver run down his spine. "You mean the figure Mary saw?" Holmes gave a short, quiet nod. "Indeed. Whoever, or whatever, has been watching the village lurking in the woods has been here for a very long time, and it seems this monument is central to whatever forces are at play." Watson glanced around uneasily. The air felt charged now, as if the very atmosphere was humming with hidden energy. Every leaf, every branch, seemed to be holding its breath. Holmes turned back to the stone pillar, running his hands along the surface as if searching for something hidden. His fingers brushed against a small indentation at the base, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. With a soft grunt of satisfaction, he pressed on it, and to Watson's surprise, the entire pillar shifted with a low, groaning creak. The earth trembled slightly beneath their feet as a hidden compartment in the monument slowly opened, revealing a small, intricately carved wooden box. Holmes's fingers moved swiftly to lift it out of the compartment, the box smooth and cold to the touch. There was no mistaking it now. The forest, the monument, the symbols, everything pointed to the same truth. Whoever had been watching Mary, whoever had been hiding in these woods, had been waiting for this very moment. "Let's see what secrets this box holds," Holmes said quietly, his voice almost reverent as he carefully opened the box. Inside was an assortment of ancient relics, all carefully placed and wrapped in cloth. Holmes lifted them out one by one, his eyes scanning each item with a practiced precision. The first was a tarnished silver locket, its surface engraved with symbols similar to those on the monument. The second was a set of keys, 3 in total, each one different, each one worn with age. The third was a small weathered parchment, its edges curled and faded with time. Holmes examined the parchment closely, his eyes narrowing. He carefully unrolled it, revealing an old map, yellowed with age. It depicted the surrounding area, the village of Willowsend, the forest, and, most intriguing of all, a series of hidden paths and markings that suggested the existence of even more secret passages beneath the land. "There's more," Holmes whispered, his voice filled with a quiet excitement. "This map leads to something deeper, Watson, something far more hidden." As Holmes continued to examine the contents of the box, Watson's mind began to race. Who had left these items here? Who had hidden them beneath the monument? And most importantly, why had they been left for someone to find now? The air around them shifted, the silence deepening once again, and for the briefest of moments Watson could have sworn he heard something. A faint rustling, the sound of a footstep behind them, as if they were not alone in the clearing. Holmes paused, sensing it too. "We are being watched again, Watson," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I have no doubt that whoever has been following us is close, and I suspect they know we are about to uncover the final piece of this puzzle." As the unsettling sensation of being observed grew, Holmes closed the box gently, his eyes darting around the clearing. "We need to leave, Watson. We've found what we came for, but I sense that danger is very near." With the box and the map secured, Holmes and Watson turned swiftly, retracing their steps toward the edge of the clearing. The forest felt different now, darker, more alive, as if the trees themselves had begun to shift, their branches leaning closer, pressing in on them. The Watcher was not far behind, and the final truth was almost within their grasp. The only question was, would they uncover it before the secrets of the forest and the Watcher claimed them all? As Holmes and Watson made their way back toward the safety of the village, the shadows in the woods seemed to lengthen, and the whispers of the past grew louder, filling the air with a haunting promise of what was yet to come. Chapter 5. The Silent Witness. The return to Willowsend was not as peaceful as it should have been. The air was thick with tension, and every creak of the branches seemed like a whisper from the past, carrying the weight of the secrets that lingered in the forest. Holmes, ever calm, walked with a determined pace, the box and the map from the hidden monument now tucked securely in his coat. Watson, though equally focused, couldn't shake the sensation that they were being followed. The shadows seemed to stretch longer with each step they took, the forest watching them with an almost predatory silence. Holmes had not spoken much since they left the clearing, his mind obviously preoccupied with the map they had discovered. It was a detailed and intricate chart of the village, the forest, and several hidden paths that snaked under the ground like a secret web. Holmes was convinced that these paths, marked in a faded ink, held the key to understanding the origins of the Watcher, the figure who had been seen by Mary and many others. But more importantly, he now suspected that the Watcher was not merely a figure from the past. He was someone living, hiding, waiting. "Watson," always keen to follow Holmes's lead, could feel the growing weight of the mystery pressing on him. Who was this watcher, and what role did he play in the strange disappearance of Mary Littlewood? What was his connection to the ancient monument and the secrets hidden within the forest? The village was quiet when they arrived back. The fog that had clung to the trees was slowly dissipating, revealing a soft twilight glow that seemed to stretch endlessly over the quaint homes and cobblestone streets. Despite the calm appearance of the village, there was an undercurrent of unease, whispers in the air, eyes watching from behind curtains. Holmes led Watson to the Littlewood estate, where Mrs. Littlewood had anxiously awaited their return. She was standing at the door, her eyes red and strained from worry. As soon as she saw Holmes and Watson, she hurried toward them, hope and fear in her expression. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice trembling, "have you found anything? Please, you must bring Mary back." Holmes offered her a calm, measured smile, though his eyes were distant. "We have uncovered some important clues, Mrs. Littlewood," he said, his voice low and soothing. "But there is still much to uncover. I believe we are closer than ever to finding your daughter." Mrs. Littlewood took a shaky breath, clutching the doorframe for support. "What do you mean? What clues?" Holmes turned toward the house, motioning for her to follow him inside. "I would prefer to explain in more detail where we are less likely to be overheard." His tone held a quiet command, and Mrs. Littlewood nodded, though her unease only seemed to grow with every word. Once inside, Holmes and Watson settled in the sitting room, and Mrs. Littlewood took a seat across from them, her eyes never leaving Holmes's face. Holmes set the small wooden box down on the table between them, and Watson could see the faintest flicker of recognition in Mrs. Littlewood's eyes, though she said nothing. "Mrs. Littlewood," Holmes began, his voice as steady as ever, "I believe the disappearance of your daughter is not as simple as it appears. It is part of something much larger, something tied to the history of this village and the forest." He paused for a moment, watching her reaction carefully. Mrs. Littlewood, clearly exhausted from the worry, still managed to keep her composure, though her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. Mary had been acting strangely before she disappeared. Holmes continued. She spoke of seeing a figure, this watcher, in the forest. This figure, I believe, is no mere hallucination. In fact, I believe he is someone who has been hiding in plain sight for many years. Mrs. Littlewood looked at him with confusion. "A figure? But what does that have to do with Mary?" Holmes's gaze darkened. "The Watcher is not just a man who stalks the woods. He is connected to a much older mystery, one that involves the very land beneath us. The Watcher has been guarding something hidden beneath the earth." Watson leaned forward, sensing the gravity of Holmes's words. "We found a hidden passage in the forest, an old stone monument with carvings that point to secret tunnels beneath the land. These tunnels appear to be connected to the Watcher, and more importantly, they are tied to the history of the monks who once lived here, centuries ago. This Watcher, I believe, is guarding their legacy." Mrs. Littlewood stared at them, her expression a mix of disbelief and fear. "But Mary, my daughter, why would she disappear into these woods? What did she find?" Holmes's expression softened, though the weight of the mystery still lingered in his eyes. "I suspect Mary was drawn into this mystery not by accident but by fate. She discovered something hidden in the forest, something that called to her. And the Watcher, he is not just a guardian of the past. He is waiting for someone. I fear that Mary, without knowing, has become a part of his story." A cold silence settled over the room as Mrs. Littlewood processed Holmes's words. Her eyes filled with tears, But she remained still, her hands clutching the edge of her chair tightly. "I need to know where my daughter is," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, Mr. Holmes. I need to know she's safe." Holmes nodded solemnly, though his face remained unreadable. "I will not rest until I find her, Mrs. Littlewood. But we must be patient. The answers are buried deep, and the Watcher is not one to be easily found. There are others who have kept his secret for a long time. We must tread carefully." As the evening wore on, Holmes spent more time reviewing the map they had found. He traced the paths marked in faded ink, noting how they seemed to lead toward a central location, a large clearing deep within the forest, a place that had been untouched by time. Watson stood by the window, watching the slow fall of night over the village, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching them. The shadows in the trees, the quiet rustle of leaves, and the cold wind that stirred outside. It all felt like an invitation. Holmes finally stood up, his fingers brushing the edges of the map. "We need to go back into the forest, Watson. The clearing marked on this map. It's where everything connects. If Mary is to be found, it will be there." The air grew heavy with the weight of their task, and as Holmes turned to Mrs. Littlewood to reassure her, a soft knock at the door interrupted the silence. Mrs. Littlewood's face paled, and she stood quickly, looking to Holmes for guidance. The door creaked open, and in stepped a tall, thin figure, his face hidden in the shadows. It was the same figure that had been lurking in the edges of the village, the figure who had been watching them from afar. The Watcher. Holmes's expression remained calm, though the tension in the room was palpable. The Watcher had arrived, and with him, the final truth of the mystery was about to be revealed. Chapter 6. The Hidden Truth. The soft glow of the evening sun had faded into the cool shadows of twilight, as Holmes, Watson, and Mrs. Littlewood stood frozen at the entrance of the sitting room. The figure who had entered the house was no ordinary visitor. The man standing before them, tall and thin, with a gaunt face partially obscured by a dark hood, was a living embodiment of the mystery that had lingered in the air for days. His presence seemed to fill the room with an invisible weight, an unsettling stillness that was at once both dangerous and expectant. Holmes's sharp eyes flickered with recognition, though his face remained unreadable. Watson, on the other hand, instinctively took a small step back, the hairs on his neck rising as a sense of foreboding washed over him. The man stood motionless for a long moment, his eyes, dark and hollow, studying the three of them with unnerving intensity. There was no greeting, no introduction, only silence. And in that silence the air felt thick, as though something ancient and unspoken had entered the room. Mrs. Littlewood, her face pale and trembling, was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" she asked, the words leaving her lips like a plea. "What do you want from us?" The Watcher, if that was indeed who he was, did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, his movements deliberate and measured, like a man accustomed to remaining unseen, lingering in the shadows. As he moved, the dim light from the hearth cast eerie shadows across his face, emphasizing the sharpness of his features. "I have been waiting for this moment," he said, his voice low and cold, as if the words had been rehearsed for a long time. There was a strange calm in his voice, yet it held an undercurrent of something darker, something that sent a shiver down Watson's spine. Holmes, ever the composed detective, observed him closely. "You are the one Mary saw, aren't you?" he asked, his voice steady, though his eyes were calculating. "The figure who has been watching from the edges of the forest, hiding in plain sight." The Watcher did not flinch at Holmes's directness. Instead, he nodded slowly, as though acknowledging a truth that had long been accepted. "Yes," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of years, perhaps even centuries of solitude. "I have watched over the forest, over the village for many years. My purpose has always been the same, to guard what lies hidden." Mrs. Littlewood's voice quivered with emotion. "Guard what? What are you protecting?" she demanded, her desperation clear. The watcher turned his gaze upon her, and for the first time there was a flicker of something resembling pity in his eyes. "I am protecting a truth, Mrs. Littlewood. A truth that your daughter, Mary, uncovered." Holmes's expression grew more intense. "What truth?" he asked, his voice sharp, probing for more. The watcher took another slow step forward, his dark eyes never leaving Holmes's. "The truth of what lies beneath the forest. The secret that has been buried for centuries, kept hidden by those who once lived here. And now, it is time for someone to understand it, to take the knowledge into their hands." Holmes's gaze flickered to Watson, who could sense the tension in the air. "What exactly are you saying?" Watson asked, his voice steady despite the unease that gripped him. The watcher's lips twitched slightly, as though he was preparing to reveal something profound, something that would shatter the calm of the moment. "Mary," he said softly, "is not lost. She has found the secret. She is the key to unlocking it." Holmes stepped closer, his brow furrowing with growing curiosity. "Explain yourself," he commanded, the edge of urgency in his voice becoming clearer. "What secret? What has Mary uncovered?" The watcher seemed to hesitate, as though weighing whether to reveal the full extent of the mystery. Finally, he spoke, his words deliberate, each one laced with meaning. "Mary found the entrance to an ancient underground sanctuary, a place that was once inhabited by the monks who lived in the forest centuries ago. This sanctuary is hidden deep beneath the roots of the forest, and within it lies a treasure that is not of gold or jewels, but of knowledge that could change everything." The room grew colder as the watcher's words hung in the air, their weight sinking in. Watson felt his pulse quicken. He had suspected for some time that there was more to this mystery than met the eye, but the mention of hidden knowledge, something that could change everything, made his blood run cold. What kind of knowledge could it be? And why was it so important that it needed to be guarded for centuries? Holmes, his face now a mask of concentration, asked the question that was burning in Watson's mind. What is this knowledge? What makes it so dangerous that it must be kept hidden for so long? The watcher's eyes darkened, and for the first time, a hint of regret flickered in his expression. "It is knowledge of the past, of a time long before this village was founded. A time when the monks were the stewards of powerful secrets that could alter the very course of history. And if the wrong person were to gain access to them, well, let's just say that the world is not ready for such power." Mrs. Littlewood, who had been listening in a daze, now stood up abruptly. "But my daughter, she's involved in all of this. Is she in danger?" Her voice cracked with fear, and Holmes could see that her mind was reeling with the implications of the watcher's words. The watcher's gaze softened, just slightly. "Mary is not in danger, Mrs. Littlewood. She has been chosen, but not because of anything she did. It is because she stumbled upon something she didn't fully understand. But now, she is the one who can unlock the sanctuary and its secrets, and I must ensure that no one else finds it before she does." Holmes's mind was working furiously. He understood now. Mary had found something in the forest, something that the Watcher was sworn to protect. But what was it that made Mary the one to unlock the sanctuary? What was the connection between her and the ancient monks who had once lived here? The watcher seemed to sense Holmes's questions, for he spoke again, this time with a quiet urgency. Mary is not just a girl who wandered into the woods. She is part of something much larger. Her family, the Littlewoods, have a connection to this land, to this forest, that goes back generations. She is a part of the legacy of the monks, the inheritor of their secrets. And now, it is time for her to embrace her role. Holmes nodded slowly, piecing together the fragments of the mystery. "And what role do you play in all of this?" he asked, his voice cool but with an underlying curiosity. The watcher's lips twitched again, a brief smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I play the role of the guardian," he replied. "I am here to make sure that the secrets of the monks are never misused, that they remain hidden until the time is right. And now, that time has come. Mary must unlock the sanctuary. She must complete what she began." As the watcher finished speaking, the room fell into a heavy silence. The gravity of his words was undeniable, and Watson could sense that they were on the edge of discovering something monumental. Yet at the same time, a part of him felt a creeping sense of dread. What if this knowledge, this ancient power, was too dangerous for anyone to possess? What if it was already too late? Holmes, as always, was unfazed, his mind already calculating the next move. "Then it seems," he said, his voice steady, "our next step is to find Mary and ensure that she is not alone in this." The watcher's expression softened, but his eyes remained watchful. "You are right. Mary must be found. But be warned, there are others who seek what lies beneath the forest, others who would stop at nothing to gain control of the knowledge hidden there. You must be careful." And with that, the watcher turned and began to walk toward the door, his steps measured, purposeful. Holmes, Watson, and Mrs. Littlewood watched him go, each of them contemplating the gravity of what had just been revealed. The search for Mary had taken on an entirely new urgency, and the mysteries that lay ahead now felt darker, more dangerous than ever before. The hidden sanctuary was waiting, and with it, the secret that could change the world. But would they reach it before it was too late? And more importantly, what would they do with it once they found it? Chapter 7. The Final Piece. The evening descended upon Willowsend with a quiet, almost unsettling calm. The streets of the village, once bathed in soft twilight, were now dim and empty, save for the occasional flicker of light from a window. Inside the Littlewood estate, a thick tension filled the air. Holmes, Watson, and Mrs. Littlewood had gathered in the sitting room, their minds swirling with the revelation that Mary's disappearance was tied to something much larger than they had ever imagined. Holmes, despite the weight of the mystery, sat with an uncanny calmness. His mind was sharp, piecing together every fragment of the puzzle that had been laid out before them. The watcher had revealed the existence of a hidden sanctuary beneath the forest, guarded for centuries by the monks, and now connected to Mary's very fate. But the final question remained. Why her? Mrs. Littlewood, her face pale, stared at the empty space in front of her, her thoughts far away. "What does it mean, Mr. Holmes?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "Why did Mary find this sanctuary? Why is she the key?" Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together as he considered the question. "I believe," he began slowly, his voice steady, "that your daughter was drawn into something she didn't fully understand. She found the entrance to the sanctuary by accident, but she was always meant to find it. It is as if her fate, her lineage, led her here." Mrs. Littlewood's eyes flickered with confusion. "Her lineage?" she asked. "I don't understand." Holmes's gaze softened. though the mystery before him remained as complex as ever. The Littlewood family has lived here for generations, Mrs. Littlewood. What you may not realize is that your family is tied to this land in a way that goes far beyond your understanding. You are not just a part of this village. You are part of a legacy that dates back centuries to the monks who once tended this forest and its hidden secrets. Watson, who had been silently listening, furrowed his brow. But how could Mary be connected to something so ancient? She was just a young girl, walking through the woods. Holmes's eyes shone with the light of understanding. That's precisely it, Watson. She was walking through the woods, yes, but she was never meant to be just a girl. The monks, those who lived here long ago, left behind something so powerful, so dangerous, that they made sure it would only be found when the time was right. And Mary, whether by design or fate, is the one who has been chosen to unlock it. The room fell silent as Mrs. Littlewood processed Holmes's words. The weight of the revelation seemed to settle on her shoulders, a burden she wasn't prepared to bear. "But what does it mean, Mr. Holmes?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "What is she unlocking? And where is my daughter?" Holmes's gaze softened with empathy, but his voice remained steady. "Mary is not lost, Mrs. Littlewood. She is exactly where she needs to be. The sanctuary, the secret hidden in the depths of the forest, is tied to something beyond this world. But to understand it, we must go to the heart of it all." The sound of the fire crackling in the hearth filled the room, but the silence that followed was thick with uncertainty. Watson leaned forward, his curiosity piqued by the mystery. "But how do we find her, Holmes? We've followed every clue, but it still feels like we're walking blind." Holmes gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "The final piece is not hidden in the forest, Watson. It is right here, in this house." He gestured to the room around them. "There is a clue, something that will reveal where Mary is and how she can be found. I believe it has been in plain sight all along." Mrs. Littlewood looked at him with confusion, then to Watson, who shared her bewilderment. "What do you mean? What clue?" Holmes stood up and moved toward the bookshelf, his fingers brushing over the spines of the old volumes that lined the shelves. He pulled a book from the middle of the shelf and flipped it open to a page near the back. He showed it to Mrs. Littlewood, who leaned in, her eyes scanning the words. It was an old family history, detailing the Littlewood lineage, but the words that caught her eye were not the names of ancestors or dates, but a small passage at the very end, written in faded ink. "The key to the sanctuary lies not in the forest, but in the heart of the family. The protector of the land will find the way when the bloodline awakens to its true nature." Watson's eyebrows shot up. "The key to the sanctuary, in the heart of the family." Holmes nodded slowly. "Exactly. This passage refers to a legacy, one that has been passed down through the generations. The Littlewoods, it seems, are not simply caretakers of the land. They are protectors of something far greater. This bloodline carries with it the power to unlock the secrets of the monks and their sanctuary." Mrs. Littlewood looked from Holmes to Watson, her face a mask of shock and realization. "So, Mary? She is the one who can unlock it because of her bloodline?" Holmes nodded. "Precisely. Mary is not just any girl. She is the heir to the knowledge, the one who can access the sanctuary and its secrets." There was a long pause as the gravity of the situation settled in. Mrs. Littlewood sank back into her chair, her face pale. "But how do we get to her? How do we find the sanctuary?" Holmes turned toward the window, his gaze distant, as if he were piecing together the final pieces of the puzzle. "The map we found, the one Mary must have seen when she discovered the sanctuary. holds the key to her location. But it is not a simple matter of following the path. There is a deeper meaning to the markings on the map. He turned back to face them. There is a final place on the map, a location marked by a symbol that is not a part of the village or the forest. It is an ancient symbol, one that only a few in this village would recognize, and I believe it is there, in that place, where we will find the entrance to the sanctuary and, hopefully, Mary. Mrs. Littlewood wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. But where is this place, Mr. Holmes? Please, tell me. Holmes's eyes hardened with resolve. It is not far from here. The symbol leads to the old chapel, the one on the outskirts of the village, the one that has long been abandoned. Watson's heart skipped a beat. The old chapel. I thought that was just a ruin, a forgotten place. Holmes's gaze sharpened. It was forgotten for a reason, Watson. The monks who lived here knew its significance, and when the time came, they sealed the entrance to the sanctuary beneath it. If Mary is indeed the one to unlock it, we must go there, and we must do so swiftly. Holmes's words were like a bell tolling in the distance, their weight resonating through the room. The pieces were falling into place, and the end of the mystery was near. But with that realization came an unsettling truth. They were not the only ones searching. There were others, hidden in the shadows, who would stop at nothing to gain access to the knowledge buried beneath the forest. As the fire crackled in the hearth, the final piece of the puzzle began to take shape, and with it, the sense of urgency grew, for time was running out. The sanctuary was waiting, Mary was waiting, and the final confrontation was about to begin. Chapter 8. The Silent Descent. The moon hung high above Willowsend, casting a pale light over the village and the surrounding forest. The streets, bathed in silver, were empty, silent as if the village itself were holding its breath. In the Littlewood estate, a quiet intensity settled in the air. Holmes, Watson, and Mrs. Littlewood were preparing for what felt like the final step in their journey. The journey that had taken them through secrets, shadows, and mysteries older than the village itself. After Holmes's revelation, the path ahead seemed clear. They were to venture to the old chapel on the outskirts of Willowsend. The place had been abandoned for years, its crumbling walls and forgotten steeple a quiet reminder of a bygone era. Yet Holmes was certain. The chapel was the key to unlocking everything. If Mary was indeed the one to unlock the sanctuary, this was where it would happen. The stillness of the night hung heavy as the three of them set out toward the chapel. Holmes led the way, his movements purposeful, but there was a subtle tension in his stride, as if even he couldn't fully predict what awaited them. Watson walked beside him, his thoughts restless. The sense of foreboding had only grown stronger with every passing moment. He could feel it, the weight of the mystery, the unseen eyes watching from the shadows. The forest around them seemed to breathe, a living, watchful presence, as if the trees themselves knew they were about to uncover something profound. Mrs. Littlewood, though nervous, walked resolutely behind them. She was no longer the woman who had come to them in desperation weeks ago. She had transformed into someone driven by the need to find her daughter, to understand the secrets that had been hidden from her for so long. Her eyes were steady now, despite the fear that still lingered beneath the surface. Holmes, sensing the growing tension, spoke quietly as they approached the chapel. "We are near the heart of it now," he said. "Everything we have discovered up until this point has led us here. The Watcher, the hidden passage, the bloodline, and the sanctuary, all of it converges at this chapel. We must tread carefully. There is no telling what we might find." Watson's voice broke the quiet tension. "You think someone else knows we are coming? Someone who doesn't want us to uncover whatever lies beneath this chapel?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, He looked up at the chapel in the distance. The structure stood like a shadow against the night sky, its silhouette stark and jagged, as though time had ravaged it into something unrecognizable. It was no longer a place of worship. It had become a tomb for secrets that had been buried for too long. "I don't believe we are the only ones searching for answers," Holmes finally said, his voice low, almost contemplative. "But no matter what we encounter, we must go forward. There are too many lives at stake. Mary's, your, family's, and perhaps even the future of this village." As they approached the chapel, the air seemed to shift. It grew colder, the breeze carrying a chill that sank into their bones. The trees around them stood silent, their branches swaying ever so slightly, as if they too were waiting, anticipating what was to come. The chapel door was ajar, the ancient wood creaking in the wind as if it had not been opened in decades. Holmes pushed the door open with a firm hand, the sound of the hinges groaning in protest, and led the way inside. The interior of the chapel was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of old stone and dampness. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting slivers of light across the dust-covered pews and rotting altar. The silence was suffocating, the only sound the echo of their footsteps on the cold stone floor. Holmes moved with purpose, his eyes scanning every corner of the room, every crumbling surface. Watson felt an uneasy shiver run through him, as if the chapel itself were a hollow shell, empty but full of unseen weight, full of secrets waiting to be unearthed. In the far corner of the chapel, where the altar had once stood, there was a narrow staircase leading down into the earth. It was barely visible, hidden beneath layers of ivy and dust, but Holmes immediately spotted it. He motioned for Watson and Mrs. Littlewood to follow him. "This," Holmes said quietly, "is the entrance to what we've been searching for. The sanctuary lies below, but remember, whatever we find, we must be ready for it." They descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The stone walls seemed to close in around them, and the further they went, the heavier the silence became. It was as if they were descending into another world, one that had been locked away for centuries, untouched by the outside world. At the bottom of the stairs, they reached a small chamber, its walls covered in thick moss and ancient carvings. The room was dimly lit by the faint glow of moonlight coming through cracks in the ceiling above. In the center of the room stood a large stone pedestal, and on it, an ancient book lay open, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Holmes approached the pedestal cautiously, his eyes scanning the open pages of the book. The text was written in a language he didn't immediately recognize, the symbols intricate and foreign. Yet there was something familiar about it, something that resonated deep within him. Mrs. Littlewood stepped forward, her eyes fixated on the book. "What is this?" she asked, her voice hushed with awe. "This," Holmes said slowly, his voice filled with reverence, "is the key. The knowledge of the monks. It is what Mary has uncovered." Holmes began to trace the symbols on the page, his fingers moving carefully, as though unlocking a door. The symbols seemed to shift beneath his touch, like a code that was slowly revealing its secrets. Watson watched, his heart pounding in his chest as Holmes whispered the words beneath his breath, piecing together the hidden message. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but then it grew stronger, pulsing as though the very earth was alive with an ancient energy. The walls of the chamber seemed to shift, the carvings on the stone glowing faintly as if responding to the book's revelations. Watson reached out instinctively, grabbing Holmes's arm. "What's happening? What have we done?" Holmes didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the pedestal. The tremors intensified, the floor beneath their feet groaning with age. It was as though the sanctuary itself was awakening, reacting to the presence of the book and the bloodline that had uncovered it. "It is beginning," Holmes said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. The sanctuary was sealed for a reason, and now, with Mary's bloodline, it has been unlocked. The tremors ceased suddenly, and an eerie silence fell over the chamber. For a moment it felt as though time itself had stopped. Holmes stepped back from the pedestal, his eyes scanning the room. "What now?" Watson asked, his voice low, as he struggled to steady his breath. Holmes's expression was inscrutable. "Now, we must make a choice." The air in the chamber seemed to thicken, and Watson could feel the weight of what they had uncovered settling in. The sanctuary was no longer just a myth. It was real, and the knowledge within it was more powerful, more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. "We must decide whether to use what we've found," Holmes continued, his voice quieter now, "or to leave it sealed, where it cannot harm the world outside." Mrs. Littlewood's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "What are you saying, Mr. Holmes? What is this power?" Holmes turned to her, his eyes serious. "It is knowledge, Mrs. Littlewood. The knowledge of the monks, their history, their power. But it is a power that should never be wielded lightly. Once it is revealed, once it is understood, there is no going back." The chamber seemed to pulse around them as if it were alive, alive with the weight of centuries of hidden truth, centuries of guarded power. Holmes turned to Watson. "We must proceed with caution. The Watcher will not be far behind, and we must prepare for what comes next." And as the stone walls of the sanctuary seemed to close in around them, the final choice was upon them. The truth was within their grasp, but would it be a truth that saved or destroyed? The moment of reckoning had arrived. Chapter 9. The Awakening. The air was thick with anticipation as Holmes, Watson and Mrs. Littlewood stood in the dimly lit chamber beneath the old chapel. The weight of what they had uncovered seemed to hang in the air, heavy and unyielding. The tremors had stopped, but the silence that followed was even more deafening. It was as though time itself had paused, waiting for them to make the next move. Holmes stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the ancient book on the pedestal. The symbols on the pages had shifted again, and now they seemed to glow faintly, as if alive. The light from the cracks in the ceiling above flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the stone walls of the sanctuary. The stone pedestal, the book, the carvings, all seemed to be alive with a pulsing energy that resonated deep within the earth. For a moment, no one spoke. The stillness was thick, oppressive. It was as if the chamber itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what they would do next. Holmes broke the silence, his voice low but firm. "The moment has arrived. What we've discovered here is not something that can be ignored. It is a power, an ancient knowledge that has been hidden for centuries for a reason." Mrs. Littlewood, still shaken from the revelation of her family's connection to this hidden legacy, looked at him with wide eyes. "But what does it mean, Mr. Holmes? What exactly is this knowledge, and why did Mary, my daughter, have to uncover it?" Holmes met her gaze, his expression serious. "The knowledge of the monks is far more than just history, Mrs. Littlewood. It's a power that has the potential to shape the world, or to destroy it. Your daughter Mary found the key, but now she is in danger, not because of what she has found, but because of what others may want to take from her." Watson's brow furrowed in confusion. "Others? You mean the Watcher?" Holmes nodded slowly. "Yes, The Watcher is not the only one who seeks this knowledge. There are others, hidden in the shadows, who would stop at nothing to control what lies beneath this chapel. And they will stop at nothing to ensure that no one, especially not Mary, can prevent them from unleashing its power. Mrs. Littlewood took a trembling step forward. But how do we stop them? How do we protect Mary? Holmes turned to the pedestal once more, his eyes scanning the book's glowing pages. "The answer lies in the book," he said softly. "It is more than a mere record of the monk's history. It contains a map, a guide to the final resting place of the sanctuary's power. Whoever controls this map will control the knowledge, but there is more to it than that. This book, this sanctuary, is not just a place. It is a living entity. It has a will of its own." Watson's heart quickened. "A living entity? You mean the sanctuary itself is alive?" Holmes nodded gravely. "In a manner of speaking, the sanctuary was designed to be protected. It has existed for centuries, keeping the knowledge hidden from the world, and now that it has been unlocked, it is awake, and it will defend itself." Mrs. Littlewood stepped closer to Holmes, her eyes filled with concern. "What does that mean for Mary? Is she in danger?" Holmes met her gaze with a rare softness. "Mary is the key to this knowledge, but she is also the one who must decide how it will be used. The sanctuary has chosen her, but it is not just a matter of unlocking its secrets. It is a matter of whether she will use that power for good, or whether it will consume her." The tension in the chamber grew heavier as the full weight of Holmes's words sank in. The sanctuary was not merely a place of hidden knowledge. It was a test, a trial. Mary had stumbled upon something much larger than she could have imagined, and now she had to navigate its dangers. But how would she do that? Would she be able to resist the temptation of the power that lay within her grasp? "We must find her," Holmes said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "And we must make sure that she understands what she has discovered. If she does not, then the knowledge of the sanctuary will fall into the wrong hands, and that could mean disaster for all of us." As the last of Holmes's words hung in the air, the ground beneath their feet trembled once again. This time the tremor was stronger, more violent. The walls of the sanctuary shook as if the very earth was stirring. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the glow from the book grew brighter, as though the knowledge it contained was stirring to life. "What is happening?" Watson asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Holmes's eyes darted around the chamber, his mind working quickly. "It is awakening," he said. "The sanctuary is reacting to the disturbance. The question is, are we ready for what it will reveal?" The tremors grew stronger, and the air grew thick with an almost palpable energy. The walls of the sanctuary seemed to hum with a deep, low vibration that reverberated in Watson's chest. It was as if the very place was alive, breathing, waiting for something. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the tremors ceased. The room fell into an eerie stillness, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire above them. The book on the pedestal lay still, its pages now completely blank, its glow fading. Watson took a cautious step forward. What just happened? Holmes's gaze was fixed on the book, his brow furrowed with deep concentration. "It's a warning," he said quietly. "The sanctuary has awakened, and it is testing us. Testing whether we are worthy to uncover its secrets." Mrs. Littlewood shivered. "But why is it blank now?" "What does that mean?" Holmes's expression darkened. "It means the sanctuary is waiting for the one who can truly unlock it. And right now, that person is Mary." "But how do we find her?" Mrs. Littlewood asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "How do we stop whatever is happening here?" Holmes's eyes met hers, filled with a quiet resolve. "We must go to the clearing, the one marked on the map." That is where we will find Mary. But we must hurry. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that the wrong people will reach her first." With those final words, the three of them turned toward the narrow passage that led deeper into the sanctuary. The weight of their mission settled over them like a heavy cloak. They were no longer just searching for a missing girl. They were fighting for the very future of the world, for the knowledge that had the potential to change everything. And as they made their way toward the clearing, the forest around them seemed to shift, as though the trees themselves were guiding them forward, urging them to hurry. They could feel it in the air, the tension, the electricity. The sanctuary was alive, and it was waiting for Mary, waiting for her to make the choice that would either save them all or destroy them. The moment of truth was drawing near. Chapter 10. The Reckoning. The forest, once serene, now seemed to pulse with an almost tangible energy. The air was thick with the weight of what was about to happen, as if the trees themselves had held their breath for centuries, waiting for this one fateful moment. The moon hung high above, casting a soft silvery glow over the path that led deeper into the heart of the forest. Holmes, Watson and Mrs. Littlewood moved with purpose, their every step taking them closer to the clearing where they believed Mary would be found. But even as they walked, a sense of foreboding clung to them, like a shadow that wouldn't let go. Holmes had never been one to speak much of his own fears, but even he could feel the weight of the situation. They were walking on the precipice of something far greater than any of them could fully comprehend. The sanctuary had been awakened, and with it, the dangerous knowledge that Mary had uncovered. The power she held in her hands was ancient, capable of great good or unimaginable destruction. As they neared the clearing, Holmes paused, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. The trees seemed to grow denser here, their branches intertwining in a way that blocked out much of the moonlight, creating an eerie, almost otherworldly atmosphere. It was as though the forest itself was holding something back, keeping its secrets hidden just beneath the surface. "There," Holmes said softly, pointing toward the center of the clearing. In the middle of the open space stood Mary, her back to them, staring at something in the distance. The sight of her, standing so still, so composed, made Watson's heart race. She looked almost ethereal in the moonlight, but there was something different about her, a sense of calm, but also an unsettling stillness, as though she were not entirely herself. "Mary!" Mrs. Littlewood called out, her voice breaking the silence. Mary slowly turned, her eyes meeting their gaze. But there was a distance in her expression, something that made her seem almost detached. She smiled softly, but it was not the warm, familiar smile they remembered. Instead, it was knowing, as if she had already seen the truth they were only beginning to understand. "Mother?" Mary's voice was soft, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper, something more profound in it. "You've come for me." Mrs. Littlewood stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Mary, darling, what's happening? What have you discovered?" Mary took a deep breath, her gaze drifting away as though she were searching for something beyond the forest. "I've discovered the truth," she said, her voice calm but distant. "The sanctuary. The knowledge that was hidden here for centuries. It's all been leading to this moment. I'm the one who was meant to unlock it." Watson's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, trying to bridge the distance between them. "Mary, we don't understand." "What do you mean? You're the key, but what's happened to you? You're not the same." Mary looked at him then, her eyes holding a depth of sadness. "I've always known there was something more to this world, something hidden, and now I know it all. The power, the knowledge, it's mine to wield. But it's not just a gift. It's a burden. A responsibility. Holmes, who had been silently observing, stepped forward now, his voice steady but with an edge of urgency. Mary, listen to me. The knowledge you've uncovered, it's dangerous. It has the power to change everything. It's not something you can simply control. The sanctuary, the monks who protected it, they built it for a reason. They knew that this kind of power could consume anyone who tried to wield it. Mary's gaze flickered with uncertainty for a brief moment, but it was quickly replaced by an eerie calm. I've already made my choice, Mr. Holmes, she said, her voice resolute. The power is mine to embrace. It's part of me now. I can feel it. I can see it. I know what must be done. A sudden coldness filled the air, and Watson instinctively stepped back, a chill running down his spine. The trees seemed to creak, as if responding to her words. The wind, which had been still moments before, began to stir, its soft whispers growing louder, almost as if the forest itself was speaking. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. He knew they were running out of time. Mary, he said gently but with urgency, this power is not something you can control alone. The Watcher, the others who seek this knowledge, they will stop at nothing to take it from you. They know the danger, and they will use you to achieve their own ends. For the first time, a flicker of fear passed through Mary's eyes, but it quickly faded. I know, she said, her voice soft but steady. But I've already made my decision. The knowledge is within me. I can feel it. It's part of who I am now. I have to finish what I started. Mrs. Littlewood, her face full of grief, reached out to her daughter. Mary, please, this is not you. The power you've uncovered. Please don't let it control you. But Mary stepped back, shaking her head. You don't understand, Mother. This is my destiny. Suddenly, a low, guttural sound echoed through the clearing, and a shadow moved between the trees. Holmes's eyes widened as the figure of the Watcher emerged from the forest, his dark eyes fixed on Mary. He had been waiting, watching, and now he was ready to claim what he had been guarding for so long. You're too late, the Watcher said, his voice cold and filled with authority. The sanctuary has been awakened, and the power is now in her hands. Holmes's mind raced. He had suspected as much, but now that the Watcher was here, everything was falling into place. The Watcher had known this day would come. He had watched over Mary, knowing that she was the one who would unlock the sanctuary. And now that the moment had arrived, he was prepared to claim the power for himself. No, Mary whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. She turned toward the Watcher, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and determination. I am the one who will decide what happens next. The Watcher smiled, a slow, sinister smile that sent a shiver down Watson's spine. No, Mary. You cannot decide. The power is not yours to wield. You are a part of something much larger than yourself. The legacy of the monks, the sanctuary, it belongs to those who were chosen to guard it. You are merely a vessel, and now the time has come to finish what they began. As the Watcher took a step forward, Mary stepped back, her eyes flashing with something wild, something untamed. I am not your vessel, she said, her voice rising with a newfound strength. I am not a part of your legacy. I am the one who chooses what happens next. I will not be controlled. The air around them seemed to crackle with energy, and the ground beneath their feet trembled once again. The trees swayed, their branches twisting in unnatural patterns, as though the entire forest was alive, reacting to the conflict unfolding in the clearing. The power of the sanctuary, of the knowledge that Mary had unlocked, was awakening in full force, and now it was up to her to decide how it would be used.
Holmes, Watson, and Mrs. Littlewood stood at the edge of the clearing, powerless to intervene. This was a moment for Mary to face alone, a moment of reckoning that would determine the future. Would she use the power for good, or would she succumb to the darkness it promised? The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her decision. The watcher stood motionless, his dark eyes never leaving Mary. She was no longer the frightened girl who had stumbled into the woods. She was something else now, something more. And as the tension in the air reached its peak, Mary took a deep breath, her eyes closing for a brief moment, as though she was summoning the strength to make the final choice. When her eyes opened again, there was no hesitation in her gaze. The power was hers, but so was the decision. "This is my choice," she said, her voice steady, resonating with the strength of someone who had finally embraced their destiny. The ground trembled again, but this time it felt different. The forest, the sanctuary, everything seemed to pause, waiting for what would happen next. And in that stillness, the future of Willowsend and the world